Welcome back. You're listening to Read Daniel Favors on SiriusXM's Urban View. We're talking powers and becomes action. I don't know about that last clip. In fact, I think I'm pretty confident that last clip was completely erroneous, but I wanted you to hear it because that is how Republicans are messaging on this current issue. Welcome back. You're listening to Read Daniel Favors on SiriusXM's Urban View. We're talking powers and becomes action. Hello, YouTube. It's a pleasure to have you all here. Welcome back. Welcome back. Hope you all had a great weekend. I've already shared my weekend with the Urban View family, so YouTube, y'all got to miss that part. But just know that don't be in Target. That's all I'm gonna say. Anyway, I wanted you all I want to first do a couple things. Number one, I want to catch us up on what took place after we got off the air on Friday when it came to the budget talks and the fact that we are not right now in a government shutdown. We're going to unpack that a little bit because, boy, is it happening? Is it happening? Is it getting fugazi out there in these streets? And then I want to talk about the next battle in this current war for justice, if you will. And that really is honing in on Medicare, Social Security, and the other entitlement programs that did not get addressed in this continuing resolution, even though Republicans wanted to have them addressed in this current budget cycle. But because they could not come to agreement, we ended up with this continuing resolution, which we talked extensively about on Friday. So we're going to talk about that as well. However, I also want to let all of you know that the latest edition of the podcast is out. Lurie breaks it down. On today's episode, we explore a concept called the righteous righteous. Now, I did not come up with the term righteous righteous. I give that credit to the one and only Feminista Jones, a phenomenal educator, scholar, writer, and thinker on a whole lot of topics that I think she's just a pretty dope sister. But she came up with this term righteous righteous to describe white Americans who are realizing what is happening and want to figure out some way to how to use their privilege, their power, and their resources to make the world a better place. And so in today's podcast episode, we took some excerpts from the conversation I had on Friday with Chris Kluwe, who is a former NFL player, white man, who does a whole lot of protesting. And we talked about what it means to be a member of the righteous righteous. And in the podcast today, you're going to hear some responses from Chris Kluwe in that interview, but a whole lot of other commentary that I'm going to share with you, or that I guess I did already share with you in the podcast episode, about selfishness, particularly among white Americans when it comes to social justice. We tend to think about selfishness as a bad thing. We don't often tend to think about it as a tool for social change. But when it comes to white people and when it comes to using their power as white people to make this world better, selfishness is actually a pretty important skill and a pretty important tool if you know how to use it properly. So that is in today's podcast. The podcast is Lurie Breaks It Down. And it's a place where we essentially try to fill in the gaps that a lot of us have when it comes to understanding how things happen in our society. So if you've ever looked at some news and been like, that don't make no sense, I feel like it's something that ain't the whole story, you are correct. That don't make no sense. There is more to the story. And that's what we do on Lurie Breaks It Down every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. We connect the dots and bring that energy, the energy that we have here in this show, to the podcast space. And so that's what's out right now. You can find that wherever you get your podcast. Lurie Breaks It Down. Please like, follow, download, subscribe, share, do all the things. And I want to now turn to what happened after we got off on Friday. As you all are aware, we had this continuing resolution that the United States had been funding its government with from the end of December up until March 14th, which was last Friday. Two things could have happened. There either could have been a budget three things. There either could have been an actual budget that was passed. And in the budget that would have been passed, ideally for the Republicans, they wanted to make sure that any budget that got passed was going to also include permanent tax cuts for the millionaires and the billionaires. Because remember, the billionaire boys' tax cuts end this year in 2025. And so what that meant was they wanted to take those $1.9 trillion tax cuts that they passed into law in 2017 and make them permanent. But you got to cut a whole lot of other things in order to do that because the budget can't sustain it. They could not come to agreement on the whole lot of other things that they have to cut. So they floated the idea of a continuing resolution. Now, I criticize the Democrats a lot when they get on my nerves because, frankly, that's my obligation. That's my job as a citizen in this nation, is to criticize government when they're doing poorly and to acknowledge when they do a good thing. I want to take a minute to just speak to Representative Hakeem Jeffries, who is actually my congressman. That's where he represents my district. I want to say that Hakeem Jeffries, there had been a lot of concern about his ability to hold his caucus together. He did the damn thing last week. The Democratic leadership did the damn thing. I mean, let's give them a round of applause because they did what was necessary. They understood that this was a false choice, that The American people were being presented with a false choice between a terrible budget that was destroying everything that we hold dear and or shutting down the government. Then we went to the Senate because remember, this is how government works. In order to get legislation like this sort of resolution passed, you need 218 votes in the House, where Hakeem Jeffries is a member of the House of Representatives, and then it gets sent to the Senate where you need 60 votes in order to do anything substantive like pass substantive legislation. Or if you're only passing a continuing resolution, if you're only doing a budget reconciliation, you need far fewer votes, just 51. And so in this particular instance, the question was, what is the Senate going to do? Because on Wednesday of last week, Senator Chuck Schumer, who is also my senator, one of my two senators. Remember, everyone's got two senators in your state. Senator Chuck Schumer was like, this is a terrible decision. We're never going to fold to the Republicans. And anytime Chuck Schumer say never, you know that's a time to wonder if it's going to be ever. And he says, we're never going to fold to the Democrat or to the Republicans because this is a bad bill. We'd rather shut down the government. And yeah, the federal workers unions were saying shut down the government. We had a call-in section, multiple call-in sections on this show where I asked people, do you think the government should shut down? To a person, except one. No, it's one person on the first day and one person on the second day. Everybody else who called in said they wanted the government to shut down. And I wanted the government to shut down. Now, here's the reality is this was a terrible situation. A government shutdown was going to be awful. It was going to be terrible. It was going to be a no good, very bad day. Or days, plural, weeks, plural, while it was going to have to be a whole lot of pressure added to the Republicans to force them to reopen the government. The risks of a government shutdown also included, however, the fact that Donald Trump and President Elongated Muskrat would be able to keep the government shut down until they wanted to reopen it, because they also have a lot of sway with the Republicans because they bought the Republican Party. So this was going to be bad no matter what. No matter what. The reason why you are seeing so many reports right now about the Democrats being upset is because even after they agreed with the continuing resolution, 10 senators agreed. Senator Chuck Schumer, Senator Kirsten Gillibrand, both of the senators from the state of New York agreed. And we have a list of the other 10, the other 8 who also participated. We'll tweet that out. But in addition to, the reality is that when they agreed to do it, right after they did it, what did President Elongated Muskrat and Donald Trump do? The co-president and the junior varsity cheerleader J.D. Vance. They signed an executive that basically dismantled 7 additional agencies down to the white meat, dismantled them to the bone. And so we saw that no matter what was going to happen, this was going to be terrible. It was going to be awful. But the very thing that the Democrats said that they were trying to avoid is the very thing that ended up happening anyway. And this idea that you wouldn't be able to file lawsuits in the same way, because that was the concern, right? After Chuck Schumer says he's not going to sign on Wednesday, he comes back on Thursday and says, well, Donald Trump and President Musk will be able to do all these terrible things that they are going even beyond what they can do right now. Then Donald Trump and Elongated Muskrat did those very bad things. So the really challenge for a lot of people was it's 6 in one hand, half a dozen in the other. Both of these were bad choices. And frankly, the reality is that both of these were bad choices, which were sort of decided on November the 5th, because there weren't enough votes. Not enough people came out to vote so that the Democrats would be able to either keep the House or expand their space in the Senate so that they could at least be a check on this government. There weren't enough votes to do those things. In addition to the fact that people were voter suppressed, people had bomb threats at their voting stations, and a lot of people stayed home. And some of y'all said that she wasn't black enough. She wasn't black enough. So that's what happened. And the 10 senators, actually, I want to read their names right now, just in case I forget to say it later. The Democrats who voted to advance this measure: Senate Minority Leader Chuck Schumer, Senate Democratic Whip Dick Durbin out of Illinois, Senators Catherine Cortez Masto out of Nevada, Senator Maggie Hassan out of New Hampshire, Senator John Fetterman, who never saw a bill that was like Kristen Sinema or something Joe Manchin would sign that he never wanted to agree to. That's my long-winded way of saying John Fetterman is trash a lot of times. Senator John Fetterman out of Pennsylvania, Senator Gary Peters out of Michigan, Senator Brian Schatz from Hawaii, again, Senator Kristen Gillibrand from New York, and Janine Shaheen from New Hampshire, and Angus King, who is an independent who caucuses with the Democrats. They all voted to advance the measure and to prevent the government shutdown. So this is a battle that if you were on the side of you wanted a government shutdown, you did not win. We people who wanted and advocated for this was not a winning opportunity. However, win can be defined in a bunch of different ways. And I want us to be clear about this because I saw somebody who posted something on one of my YouTube videos, a comment where they said that they're no longer a Democrat because of the shutdown. And I thought that was interesting. And I just wanted to take a moment to say the following. Guys, Politics is the science of distributing resources. It is, and politicians are the people that we hire to make those resource distribution decisions. And the resources that I'm talking about are things like fresh food, fresh water, access to clean air, access to schools and hospitals, and transportation, and healthcare, and libraries, and medical facilities. These are all a part of the social good, the resources that get distributed based on politics. The politicians are the people that we hire with our votes, or with our non-votes, or with our misinformed votes, to make those resource allocation decisions. And so the question we have to ask ourselves is, one, does it make sense to identify personally with the political party, or should we be identifying with the issues that we care about, which might show up differently regardless of which party you're in? And I'm saying this because sometimes we cling so much to a political identity as defined by the parties that we can sometimes have that identity work to undermine what it is that we're trying to do. A lot of people talk a lot about third parties after or right before a major election, which is the wrong time to have that conversation. If you want to have a conversation about third parties, now would be a good time. So, like, when I think about third parties, I'm not talking about the Green Party. Shout out to them, but sorry, I'm not in my community. I don't see the Green Party on the ground doing anything that would make me think they are a viable third party. They run Jill Stein every 4 years, and every 4 years she's a spoiler and destroys our ability to actually move forward because we have a binary electoral system. I rock with the Working Families Party, and in New York, they are a vibrant third party, and they are set up such that when you vote on the Working Families Party, people who run on the Working Families Party are also running on the Democratic line. So I vote for them, and I encourage all my friends in New York to vote for the candidates that you want. If they're showing up on both party lines, to vote Working Families Party, because they are a Black-led, right now, it's not always Black-led, but right now their leadership is largely of African descent. They are comprised of people who work for a living, and they don't do we're going to run for president every 4 years. They start on the ground level. They start on the ground level with policies, with legislation, and with running candidates at the local level. And quite frankly, I've seen them be very, very successful. Attorney General Letitia James, she started on the Working Families Party line. Like, she was somebody who, when she was running for city council, ran for city council as a part of the Working Families Party. So if you were thinking about a third party because you are upset about what happened and you're frustrated, then you need to think about it strategically. Now is the time to be having these conversations if you want to plan to support a third party. But the reality is, we also have to be clear. This is about a cycle of battles. Friday was not some massive war. It was one of many, many battles that is going to exist in this struggle for power, because, again, politics is the science of distributing resources. So we need people to be clear about that, to activate, to organize, and to do the work of making these 10 Democrats, make them as miserable as possible. People were talking about whether or not they're going to have AOC primary Chuck Schumer. That's 4 years from now. Chuck Schumer is safe for the next 4 years. But as somebody who thinks he is a wimp in this issue, I plan on, as his constituent, making his life miserable by activating as a constituent. I'm going to be joining my local indivisible groups, in addition to the work that I want to continue doing with the NAACP chapter. I want to be calling his office and letting him know I'm going to be on that ass, Chuck, because what the fuck? Having said all that, we need to be clear that because this is not about any singular battle, it really is about the massive war for resources that we're in right now. And I need us to think about that. None of these things should be something that has us so wrapped up, tied up, and tangled up in an individual instance that we forget the bigger picture. And the bigger picture is, I'm not even going to say the bigger picture is preserving democracy, because I'm a Black woman and we don't had more years of democracy in this country than not. And most of those years of democracy, my people was either enslaved, or they was in chains, or they was in Jim Crow, or they was running from the lynch mob. So I ain't even about like preserving democracy. I'm trying to preserve a space where we can have equitable access to resources, privilege, power, and opportunity. Whatever that looks like is what it looks like. Because as these folks break this system, I need to be clear about what me and mine need, because what me and mine need have never really been something that's been met by this society. So let's put that to the side for now and talk about what this next issue is. Because in addition to the fact that the continuing resolution passed and we are now not in a government shutdown, there are some good things to that. Because if we were, again, in a government shutdown, it was not going to be great. It was going to be awful. It was going to be terrible. And what we have right now is awful and terrible. And what I'm about to share with you is some insight into just how awful and terrible it really is. Remember, I told y'all how I was, when I started out my legal career as an attorney, I started out at a corporate law firm, right? I came out of NYU School of Law, and this was at a time when jobs were plentiful. And it's this weird system that's set up to where if you do good in school your first year in law school, which I did, then you get to interview with a whole bunch of law firms that come to your school at the beginning of your second year of law school. If you interview well, well, which I did, you're going to get interview offers, or I'm sorry, you're going to get placement offers for summer internships for the summer following your second year. That all happened. I worked the system. It worked out well for me. And when I got to the job, if you do well that second summer, then and you pass the bar, then you typically get a job offer to have a permanent placement at the law firm where you worked your second summer. That worked out for me. It was a good situation. I made more money than Black Jesus. Them days was good. They was well funded. Them days are long gone because I am now fully a public interest attorney. But I mentioned this story because there was a point once I became a full associate, a first year associate at this law firm, something happened to my salary that made me very, very concerned because I didn't want them thinking that this Black girl was stealing from them because I did not grow up with money. I had like lived in whole ass shelters as a kid. And I remember standing in line for the government cheese, the powdered milk, powdered eggs, all of that. So I was a little nervous. Like when something happened with my check, I don't want nobody looking at me. And I'm always thinking somebody looking at me because I'm poor and I don't really belong here. Right? I guess that was the poor kids version, the poor Black kids version of imposter syndrome. So I'm at this law firm, things are going good. And I noticed my paycheck at a certain point, like during the summer, had a huge increase. An increase that it wasn't like a couple of dollars. And it relative to the other part of the paycheck, it wasn't that big, but it was big enough to make me say, wait a minute. Somebody put in some wrong numbers and they gave the poor Black kid some access to money that I ain't supposed to have because I ain't never seen these numbers before. My paycheck is bigger now than it was in my last pay stub. My last pay stub is right here. I'm comparing numbers. I'm nervous because you know how like you Black and you in the store and you know they don't think you belong there. How like you get nervous. You can get really nervous. So I looked at my check. So I make an appointment. I go to HR. Now I'm already concerned about HR. I don't want nothing to do with HR because I know HR is there to protect the company. But I also don't want nobody from billing calling me out, talking about you was Black and stealing from the white man. So I'm like, we got to have a conversation. So I take my pay stub to HR and I'm like, hey, man. No, I'm sorry. I put on my office voice. Yes, hi, this is Lurie. I was just wondering if I could speak with somebody because I have some concerns about what's happening with my pay stub. And I just want to make sure that everything's on the up and up. And so just want a chance to talk. Did y'all hear the voice change? My husband used to call my office and be like, I would answer the phone, be like, Lurie Daniel Favors. And he'd be like, baby, it's me. I'd be like, all right. You're like, you ain't got to talk like that when I'm calling. Whew. Anyway, I get to HR. We have the conversation. And what they tell me is that I've hit the cap. The Social Security cap. Because apparently, as people who make more money than they've ever made before quickly learn, there is a limit on the amount of income that you have to pay Social Security on. And let's say, and I can't remember what the limit is right now, but let's say once your salary hits $150,000, once you've hit that $150,000 mark in your annual earning year, maybe for you that happens on December, maybe for you it happens in September. For me, it happened in the summertime because again, I was a law firm associate making more money than Black Jesus, and it was a weird situation. So I hit that number. And after you hit that number, and again, let's just say the number is $150,000. Once you hit that number, every other paycheck that you get thereafter for the rest of that year is going to be higher because you're no longer paying towards Social Security. You've hit your cap. Now, if you are a billionaire, like somebody like me, I hit the cap in the late summer of that year. If you were a billionaire, and every year that, let me just pause here to say, every year after that my salary increased, I hit the cap earlier and earlier and earlier in that year. And so if you're a billionaire, you might hit the cap within the first 5 minutes of the new year. So January 1st, at 12:05 a.m. of 2026, Elongated Muskrat will have already hit the cap for Social Security. He ain't paying nothing else in the Social Security at all for the rest of that year. This is one of the reasons why Social Security is under stress right now. But I say that to say that there are a lot of ways that we can address what's happening with Social Security. But the Republicans want to address what's happening with Social Security in this way. They are doing the thing that they often do, which is what I've been calling the wash, rinse, and repeat cycle. They defund the thing they don't like. Then they talk shit about the thing that they don't like not working because they defunded it. And then they say, hey, we don't need to have this government function provided service for you anymore. We'll just outsource it and we'll have a private company do this for you because the government obviously can't do it because they don't do it well. And they forget to add that the reason the government don't do it well is because the Republicans, defunded the government's capacity to do the thing. Y'all following me? All right. So Jug Legum, who is the editor at Popular Information, has an article out. And I really like Popular Information. It's one of my favorite white-owned media outlets, them and ProPublica. Jed Legum, white man. He's good for what he does. And his article is called Exclusive. Memo details Trump plan to sabotage the Social Security Administration. There is an internal Social Security, an SSA memo that was sent on March 13th. the day before the budget negotiation deadline. And it basically detailed changes to the claims process that would destroy the agency's ability to provide services, cause a whole lot of processing delays, and prevent Americans from either applying for or receiving the benefits. This is the wash, rinse, and repeat. Destabilize the thing, defund the thing, make it not work, and then have some private corporation pick up the service provision. So Elongated Muskrat has been saying a whole lot of lies about Social Security lately. He's called it a Ponzi scheme. He says that 10% of federal expenditures out of Social Security were related to fraud. That is false. There is a thing called Social Security fraud, but it is less than 1% of the total Social Security benefit paid and benefits that are paid. And according to the report, less than 0.1% of the federal budget. Most improper payments, he says, are not criminal fraud, but the result of beneficiaries who fail to update their records. And quite frankly, once the records do get updated, that money is coming back, because the government's very good about getting its money back. Now, the biggest change that they're proposing to Social Security service provision is to require internet identity proofing to be made over the phone or internet service. And so this is, your identity would have to be proved over the phone, over the internet, and your benefits claims, which used to be able to be made over the phone, they now want to move to the internet service. And remember, I said last week, there was this weird this weird strain of news that was saying how they wanted to end the ability to use the telephone to get access to Social Security benefits, which is a real problem for older people who do not know how to use cell phones the way that they would need to in order to get the same services through their cell phone or through their internet. Yeah, that's where all of this is leading. So the biggest change that they're requiring at this memo, according to the report, is to require, again, internet identity proofing for benefits claims made over the phone. So they were at first going to cancel the phone service completely. And then everybody got in an uproar about it. And then they were like, oh my God, did we say we're going to cancel the benefits services completely over the phone? Psych, we're kidding. No, that's not what we meant to do. And so now they're saying, we're not going to cancel the phone service for you to use for your Social Security benefits, but the claims that you file over the phone will not be finalized unless you use the internet interface, which means your pop and your mima and your big mama gonna have to, they'll be able to call in their claims and their questions for Social Security. But when it comes time to having that claim finalized, when it comes time to having their benefits increased or adjusted to account with the new life circumstances that they done told y'all about over the phone, they're gonna have to either get in their car and drive to a Social Security office if they have a car and file it in person, or they have to go online. But did I mention that in addition to the fact that they wanted to cut the phone services and they want to shift the way that they finalize the benefits claims, that they're also closing hundreds of Social Security offices all across the country? Did I mention that? I should have mentioned that, because that's a really big freaking deal. Right now, if you are a social service, an SSA agency, a Social Security Administration claimant. I said agency, I meant to say claimant. If you are a claimant, you can make your claims and verify your identity without going to the internet or visiting a Social Security office. But according to Elongated Muskrat, they don't like that, because what they really want, and the Republicans have wanted this since Social Security became a thing, they want it to be private. They want it to be privatized. And so they are working really hard to be able to say, no, we didn't cut the phone services for your grandma, your pap, or your little child who's got disabilities to get access to services. We didn't cut the phone service. We did just add this teensy-weensy little change where you can call us on the phone, but we're not going to finalize anything until you come into the office or until you get online and work your little doodads and your little widgets and your apps and make sure that you can get the information that you need to us electronically or in person. Now, are we closing the offices? Yes, we are. Are we making the app very difficult for you to navigate? Yes, we are, because we don't really like Social Security. That's the Republicans' approach to this. Now, because they serve a really large population, the Social Security Administration agency, they serve a population that's incredibly old or physically disabled. Most of them cannot access the internet. And that's not shade. That's just the reality. It was technology that was not native to them or is not made for their skill set to be able to use. According to the article, under the new system, this would force these populations to visit an office to have their claims processed. And the memo says that it would require 75,000 to 85,000 in-person visitors per week to the Social Security office in order to implement the policy. But they're also firing SSA workers. So they're shutting down Social Security offices. They're firing Social Security administrators. They're changing the system to file benefits or to claim benefits in such a way that you have to go to the office or you have to use the internet. So they are going to increase the demands on the Social Security agency while they're decreasing the capacity for the Social Security agency to meet those demands, all to get you and your pap and your mima to say Social Security don't work. I don't even like this system. It's a terrible system. Because once enough people get mad at the defunded system that can no longer meet their needs and provides all of these weird additional ways that they have to get access to services, then a private solution is going to be on the way. Do you see how this works? They're very good at this. And so, again, as I say at the end of every one of these segments, just about, I need us to understand what civic engagement looks like, not for an individual battle, but for the long haul. And this long haul is going to require people to get actively engaged. There is now an effort. Hakeem Jeffries has shifted. He's like, listen, we got sold out by the Democrats in the Senate, the 10 Democrats or 9 Democrats and 1 independent. We got sold out. You done seen people ask Hakeem Jeffries, do you have any daylight between you and Chuck Schumer? And what's Hakeem Jeffries saying? Next question. Are you and Chuck Schumer all right? Next question. Do you have any confidence in Chuck Schumer? Next question. Now Hakeem is like, listen, we're gonna continue to work with our Democratic colleagues on in the Senate because that's what we got to do. And he's correct. That's what he's got to do. That is his role, which is another reason why I am not an elected official. But we're in a moment right now where 7,000 Social Security office workers are being terminated. That's 12% of the workforce. Dozens of their offices are being closed. And in some communities, many of them rural, which is going to impact red, white, black, blue, and indifferent as it pertains to color, you're going to have to drive over 100 miles to get to the nearest Social Security Administration agency office. This is how they destabilize one of the programs that has provided the most amount of access to equity and resource and community preservation of any other programs that we have that are being administered at the federal level. So what do we need you to do? We need you to get on your phones and use your 5 Calls app if you are using the app. We need you to get on your phones and call your elected officials. We're not waiting till the last minute. We're calling them right now and telling them, hands off Social Security. My grandma, my child, my uncle and them, they need Social Security. And who are we calling? You're calling your 2 senators, you're calling your your congressional representative, and you're going to start calling your state representatives, because what happens at the federal government always makes its way to the states, my saints, my caints, and my ain'ts. And so we got a lot of work to do. And I'm just hoping that as we are seeing the ways in which some battles you win and some battles you lose, stick with the fight. Stick with the fight, because I ain't got no place for 44 million Black people to go if we was trying to flee. And quite frankly, as hard as it is to get your Social Security Administration claims done, as hard as it is to get your passport solutions together, as hard as it is to get somebody on the IRS at the phone, we're going to have to figure this out real quick, fast, and in a hurry. We got to go to commercial break. 866-801-8255. 866-801-TALK is the number. Thank you to the YouTube family. I appreciate y'all. TMFJ, shout out to you. The super, yeah, okay, I see you, friend. Thank you. Thank you to all of y'all in the comments. Appreciate you. We are going to commercial break. We'll take your calls. 866-801-8255. 866-801-TALK is the number. This is what activism looks like. It ain't what democracy looks like, but it is what activism looks like. Well, maybe democracy in a Eurocentric context. In any event, we got to go to commercial break. I love y'all. We'll be right back after this. Bye, YouTube.